Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to have you with us here at our first IBA stage of 2024. It's great to be back, and it's great to have with us a Biennial that we haven't had so far in our program, and we really look forward to hearing about their history and their most recent edition. I would really like to welcome our guests today, Matt Packer, who is CEO and Director of EVA, EVA International, Ireland's Biennial of Contemporary Arts. Welcome, Matt. He has held this position since 2017. Prior to this, he was director of the Centre for Contemporary Arts in Derry, Londonderry, Northern Ireland, and associate director of Traignac project. I might have butchered that. Sorry about that. Wonderful, in France. Which is an independent curatorial, independent curatorial projects of his includes they call us the Screamers at Tulsa Festival in Galway, and Disappearing Acts in Lofoten International Art Festival in Norway in 2015. Welcome, Matt, and welcome, Eva. Welcome, EVA International. We are particularly happy to have you here this year because it was a round anniversary for EVA. And so we look forward to hearing more about what this meant within the trajectory of the institution, but also, of course, how this last edition played out and how it unfolded in Limerick and beyond that. The guest program of the last edition was titled The Gleaners Society, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that. But I also want to stress that this was just a part of EVA's international wider project, which is something that we often forget in other biennials as well to discuss. We focus very much on the key exhibition, on the central exhibition. So I'm really hoping that today will be a chance to discuss the more complex side of biennials, which is what happens also aside from the main project. Having said all this, I am more than happy to give you the floor, Matt, and I'll be joining back at the Q&A session after the presentation. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, Christian. And thanks to the wider IBA team for inviting me to present as part of the stage program. It's a great pleasure. So I'm going to share my screen and talk through a number of slides. So I have about 20 or so slides, and what I'm planning to do is give a general introduction to EVA and its history. I'm going to have to fly through that because that history is quite long. I'm going to talk specifically then about the 40th EVA International, which closed at the end of October last year, so our most recent edition. I'm also going to stress within the presentation both like programmatic aspects. So I'm going to show images of artworks and projects that took place in the 40th edition. But I would also like to talk about some more operational and strategic initiatives that have been under the hood of EVA International and part of its development in recent years. So I guess the first thing to say is that EVA International is Ireland's Biennial of Contemporary Art. It takes place in Limerick, which, for those unfamiliar with Ireland, is, I think, the third most populous city in the Republic of Ireland, on the kind of west coast of Ireland. It's a city with a population of about 100,000 people, so it's a small city by European and global standards. But EVA's taken place exclusively there since 1977. It's a city that has, I guess, has been developed in a kind of relatively uneven way. There were periods of prosperity in the 20th century and more recently, but it's also a city that has suffered as quite badly as a result of the financial crash, and as well as the general kind of economic recessionary period of Ireland in the 60s through to the 80s. And I think Limerick is a city that kind of wears all of that kind of in its skin. You can kind of feel that uneven development of the place, and that city is very much a character of the Biennial, and is an important, I think, character or player within any experience of the Biennial, both for curators that curate editions with EVA, but also for an attending public. The history of EVA is often told through a history of curators that have curated various editions of EVA since 1977, and I have a list of them here on this first screen. And it's a list that is quite remarkable in an Irish context. Ireland is EVA rather is one of Ireland's longest running continuing programs of contemporary art. So it predates the Irish Museum of Modern Art. It predates a lot of the contemporary cultural infrastructure that's in place today. So it's remarkable that, you know, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and through to present day, EVA was in the business of appointing some very significant and influential curators, you know, from Rudy Fuchs, Saskia Bosch, Germano Salon, and so forth. And it's a list of curators that, of course, we're very, very proud of. But it's also a list, I think you could say, that we sort of struggle with. And I think one of the projects that we're undergoing now at a strategic level within the organization is to think of ourselves as an organization beyond just a chronology of famous curatorial names, and to think of ourselves less as an event attributed to these individuals and more as a sort of an organization that has multiple different contributors and beneficiaries. It's important to say from the very beginning that, of course, the nature of the engagement with these different curators has changed from the 70s to the present day. You know, up into from the 70s to the early 1990s, EVA was very much a sort of an adjudication business. It was a case of artists submitting to what was at that time an annual open call that would then be selected by an appointed curator. And it wasn't really until the 1990s that began to kind of expand out, and curators began to develop more, I guess, proactive initiatives to commission work directly with artists or to work beyond the walls of the Limerick City Gallery, which was the traditional host of the organization. So in that sense, the history of EVA and the history of its curatorial appointment has mirrored developments with curatorial practice. So from the mid-90s through to present day, EVA took a much more interventionist turn. It became quite renowned for developing projects with artists that would penetrate the fabric of the city in different ways, as opposed to creating big, grand exhibition narratives. EVA was more synonymous with the kinds of projects that we're seeing on the screen here. Felix Gonzalez Torres, who presented a work that was a series of trailing lights across one of Limerick's main thoroughfares, and this work by Santiago Seara, which was a performance event that took place in the early hours of Sunday morning with a number of stolen vehicles that were requisitioned from the police and some burning tires. I mean, I look back at this now and I'm amazed that this was ever made possible. And I think the kind of the editions we have today take a little bit from this spirit, from this interventionist spirit, but they combine them with a kind of more essayist kind of exhibitionary approach. So I'm just going to show a few slides of recent editions just to give you a flavor of it. This was the 39th edition, which took place during the COVID period. We organized this edition rather than as one big event. We decided to create it in 3 different phases that took place across 20 and 2021. And we developed the idea of 3 phases because we thought we could therefore be responsive to the different and changing protocols of, you know, around venues and social distancing and that sort of stuff. So it was a very exhausting, in fact, very exhausting business putting on what were effectively 3 kind of mini biennials over the COVID period. This is a presentation in an industrial site called Park Point of the Kosovo Oral History Initiative as part of a program that was curated by Mervel Varen. This is from 2018. EVA coincided in that year with a very important moment in Irish political history, which was a referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment, which would effectively make abortion illegal, make abortion legal rather, repealing what was a very repressive and very conservative approach to abortion up until that moment. It was quite a difficult moment in Ireland, and quite a divided. It felt like society was quite divided. I mean, overall, the decision was made to repeal the 8th Amendment, but in a city like Limerick, that is still quite a religious context, you could really feel a kind of friction on the streets. So it was all the more important that we were able to develop a project like this, which was a performance, a street procession that took place through the streets of Limerick, organized by a group of artists that went under this banner of the Artist Campaign to repeal the 8th Amendment. I said that EVA has been based in Limerick, and that is true, but very occasionally we also collaborate with other national partners in different parts of the country. And this is an example of a project that we did in partnership with the Irish Museum of Modern Art, where they effectively allowed us to occupy 2 small project spaces. And so we created a kind of a parallel project to the main event in Limerick in those spaces in Dublin. So there was a sort of dialogue between these 2 different national contexts. And for those that are unfamiliar with Ireland, I should say that connecting between Limerick and Dublin, you know, we're talking about a 2.5-hour train journey. So although it's a small country, the public infrastructure is relatively limited. So it did mean in real terms that we were able to create and cultivate different audiences across these different sites. So I'm going to get into the presentation proper now, but before I do, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a piece of strategy work that we did in 2018. And it's a strategy that has launched us into the current mode in which we operate. And it was a strategy that really was the first strategy that EVA really had ever produced, believe it or not. And it was the first time I think we began to think of ourselves as an organization and not just as a series of consecutive events. And some of the reflecting on this strategy was that in 40 years of EVA's existence in Limerick, there was relatively little that had been retained in terms of curatorial knowledge or in terms of cultural infrastructure. All of those amazing curators that have come to Limerick and had given their time very generously to the city and to the project, of course, they leave again, and with them, a lot of the values left too. And so I think there was a recognition that we needed to change that a little bit. We needed to change that relationship between the kind of invited curatorial process and our capacities to sort of retain and develop ways of working that went beyond that process. So that the organization wasn't just like starting and stopping on the appointment of an international curator, but rather had more kind of continuing and building. It was in the effort of kind of building something kind of bigger and more lasting. So we went through this sort of strategic process that reflected on those kinds of points, and we came up with a new plan, which is the kind of program plan that we operate with today. And that plan consists of 3 integrated channels of program. So there's a guest program, so we still do the business of appointing an international curator, and we still think that's important because we recognize that we recognize the need to and want to connect internationally, and the limited means by which we're able to do that organically. So by appointing an international curator, we're not just appointing a curatorial celebrity, but we're appointing someone with a geography of knowledge that would otherwise be inaccessible to Ireland and to Irish artists. So that we call the guest program. We also introduced a couple of other initiatives, one of which is platform commissions, which I'm also going to talk about in a bit, which is a significant channel for us, and it's a channel of commissioning new works by artists that are based in Ireland, and they are selected by a panel of artists and curators and writers that we convene separately to the guest program. And then thirdly, we have this initiative called partnership projects, and really that's a way of like catching everything else, taking opportunities to work with different institutions that might approach us, or responding to different kind of funding opportunities. So together, those 3 integrated channels of program become the biennial framework. So you can see there that we've tried to resolve that issue of throwing all of our facility and resources behind a single curator into a model that was more distributed and didn't necessarily put the guest curator at the front and center of our activity. And all of those 3 channels were then compassed by a broad thematic inquiry. So in the case of the 40th edition, we invited Sebastian Cichocki, who at that time was head of research and exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, who had a very distinct proposal and has a very distinct curatorial practice. We invited him to develop a guest program. We worked with Emily Josier, the artist Emily Josier, and curator Porricky Moore as to be part of the panel for our platform commissions, and they selected 6 projects that were then realized as part of the 40th edition. And partnership projects, we did a project with B. McMahon that resulted from a bid that would put forward for the Irish representation at Venice for 2024. When we were ultimately unsuccessful, but we decided to continue that relationship and make that manifest for the 40th edition, as well as a project called Never Look Back, which I'm going to speak to in a bit. And all of that was compassed by this very broad idea of citizenship. And I mean, a very important word that arrives at a very important time, but I also want to stress that it was a word that was designed to be quite sort of porous. So it wasn't really a brief so much as a kind of filter through which these different ideas and these program channels could be seen and responded to in different ways. So the 40th EVA International took place from 31st of August to 29th of October. There were a total of 55 artists and collectives, I think, altogether, combining platform commissions, guest program, and everything else. And it took place across 17 different venues, 17 venues in Limerick, which in the history of EVA is a lot. Some of those venues were institutional venues, the Limerick City Gallery of Arts. There's a very important artist-run space in Limerick called Ormston House. These are institutions that we continue to work with from edition to edition. But there were also a whole load of other venues that came online that were much more responsive to different project needs. So we worked with St. Mary's Cathedral, we worked with a vegetarian restaurant, we worked with a primary school, we worked with the university, we worked with a pub below Eva's office. A great range of venues that, of course, not only meant that the project was very distributed across the city, but the nature of that experience, both for artists and for like an attending public, was very much woven into the experience of being in the city. You were moving from, a gallery space to a pub basement to a vegetarian restaurant to a university complex in your route through the edition. And I think that was important not only for the overall curatorial strategy, but also important and responsive to the kind of city that Limerick is. Limerick is not a city with big, vast warehouse spaces on the docklands that tend to be more befitting to these kinds of to biennial presentations. It's a very vernacular architecture, and it's a very unassuming kind of place. And working in the way that we did with different venues was a way of actually leaning into that spirit. So I'm just going to show you a few examples. Firstly, from the guest program. So this is a guest program curated by Sebastian Chichotsky. As Christian mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the guest program had its own title, which was the Gleaners Society. And Sebastian, I guess, responded to this idea of citizenship by coming up with a program that focused on this idea of gleaning, both as a subject, but also as a curatorial metaphor of sorts. So gleaning is this historical agricultural term for sort of grazing the land after a harvest, for any kind of residual and residual remnants, really, that could be used for food. It's a kind of form of scavenging, basically. And this idea of gleaning, I think, became quite important to Sebastian because I guess it proposes a way of looking at value, or a way of looking at value differently. It was also a way of tapping into things that were quite important and have been important to his general curatorial practice, which was artists that were working between artistic contexts and rural and ecological activism, these kinds of things. So, I mean, just to sort of talk through some of the examples and really hammer it out, Isa Tarovitz produced a number of sculptures that were placed around the Limerick City Gallery, in among the City Gallery's permanent collection. And Isa's an artist that uses a lot of materials that she finds from old bits of agricultural machinery, redundant bits and bobs that are just kind of left around the farm, and she makes these sculptural works that kind of echo both kind of agricultural traditions and also echo like histories of modernism. So there were quite a lot of works in the show that included artists that drew from the kind of subject of agriculture, from the subject of farming, from the subject of ecological concern. There was also a very important Irish artist called Orla Barry that presented a number of different works in the City Gallery. Orla is an artist, but also a like a pedigree sheep farmer. So she spends her time split between those two roles, and a lot of her practice is based on that relationship, which is a relationship that I guess is not only to do with different professions, art and farming, but it's one that's complicated, or she feels is complicated by, you know, being a gay woman in what is quite a heteronormative working context, you know, farming. So a lot of her work kind of reflects on those relationships. But there was also sort of gleaning in other senses too. So this work that you'll see in the foreground here by Natsuko Ishino, which is a mixture of sculptural works that the artist produces, as well as objects that the artist finds. So gleaning in this sense is this kind of act of gathering together in order to, yeah, propose the value of something new. And in this image, you'll see at the back here, Goshka Makuga's like digital fabric collage that has a sort of is a more sort of ironic, uses irony and in relation to ecological activism. So you have like panda bears and polar bears with ecological slogans and that sort of stuff. So I'm just trying to give an example of the different ways in which kind of gleaning operated as a curatorial methodology. It also appeared in this kind of way, which was Sebastian was interested in the history of EVA, and for him, gleaning could also extend to using works or presenting works or representing works that had a prior history of being exhibited in Limerick. So these works by the late Janet Milani, who is also a very important Irish figurative artist, that were presented in EVA back in 1998. Sebastian saw it as a kind of an act of curatorial gleaning to bring them back to Limerick. And here they were presented at Ormston House. I mentioned the 17 different venues, and I gave you a kind of flavor of the different sort of spaces that were being used, from vegetarian cafes to cathedrals. And in this case, there's just some images here of the University of Limerick spaces. The University of Limerick does have a gallery, a small gallery that it uses for temporary exhibitions, but most of our use of the University of Limerick were in other kinds of spaces. So the basement of the conferring center for Lala Meredith Volu's photographs, or a kind of recess area outside a lecture hall for Icky Baraka's presentation. And on the right-hand side, you have what was an old cafe that was between tenders. So we kind of used the university campus also in a kind of an interventionist way, creating a whole load of pop-ups within the space of the campus. It's important to say maybe that the university campus is about 30 minutes away on bicycle from Limerick City. So relative to the scale of the place, it requires a very deliberate act of very deliberate and intentional visit from attending publics to get out there. We organized buses and did our best to kind of communicate the different spaces in the Biennial, but we also were quite open to the idea that with 17 venues, you know, we weren't trying to create a program that had a kind of single viewer at its core. You know, we didn't necessarily expect that one person would visit all of these different 17 venues, although that would be ideal. We allowed ourselves the idea that, you know, there are different constituencies of viewership, and they may or they may not cross over. And of course, University of Limerick, although it's relatively disconnected from this Limerick city centre, it has its own community of students and staff, and it's an incredibly busy place. And we actually just accepted and lent into that idea that, yeah, different venues are going to pull in different audiences in different ways. If that experience is fragmentary rather than holistic in terms of the overall biennial experience, then that's fine. So that's the university. Another important project for us was Naveen Dosos and the Grove Vegetarian Cafe. The Grove Vegetarian Cafe is what was like an existing cafe. It has a history, dates back 50 years, I think, in Limerick, and it's Limerick's first vegetarian cafe, run by Sue Hassett. So it's an independent family business, and Naveen was invited by Sebastian to think about developing a project for Limerick, and Naveen really just like went on her own track and did some research and contacted Sue directly, and very quickly came to the table with a proposal that they would work together, Naveen and Sue, to come up with a mural design for the entire interior of the cafe. So what you're looking at is almost the full extent of the cafe. It's a very small place. And Sue very generously just offered Naveen that opportunity. And Naveen developed a project that it consisted of this wall mural. It's a wall and ceiling mural. It extends out into the hallway. It also includes, although the image here doesn't represent it very well, a number of table ceramics for, just for sugar and salt and that sort of stuff, as well as paintings that exist under glass on each of the different tables, as well as cushions and a sign that appears on the outside of the building. So it is a full, total kind of redesign of Sue's interior, and it was a great project. I mean, it required the Grove to close for maybe 10 days while the work was done, but the Grove continues to operate through the duration of the biennial on its regular hours. We opened it additionally on certain days when the Grove wasn't available, just for attending publics, and made it available by appointment and that sort of stuff. But the idea really was not to sort of interfere or impose on an existing business or an existing operation within the city, but rather just like work with it. And we're quite, this was and still is a very important project for us. It's effectively a temporary, not temporary, what's the opposite of that? Yeah, a permanent or semi-permanent installation. And we're currently in the process of developing with Sue like an MOU that organizes like maintenance and care and upkeep of the space. So it's a work that is really part of EVA's archive, and it will continue to be, obviously. We also work with Thomond Primary School, and I guess this is the most extreme example of what I was talking about earlier about different constituencies of audience, because Thomond Primary School was not an accessible space. There were 3 different projects that took place there, 2 by Slavs and Tatars, one a window vinyl, which was the name of the school in Ukrainian on the window facade of the building. There was also an audio work in one of the playground areas by Slavs and Tatars also. And Didro Mani also worked with a gardening club within the school, an existing gardening club, to create a little microforest full of native trees and that sort of stuff. So there were 3 projects that took place within the school, most of which, of course, were inaccessible to a general public. The school, you could attend and you could peer from the perimeter gates at the window vinyl, but and we also organized a number of different open days, but largely our priority was to think about working with the school and to kind of acknowledge and respect the constituency of audience that exists at the school, which is, of course, the pupils, the staff, and parents to a lesser extent. So this kind of way of working was quite, is relatively new to us, but it's one that we're quite excited about. And again, in these examples, these are also semi-permanent works. They're going to continue, they have a life that continues beyond the 40th edition. So I've just talked about the guest program, and I'm now going to turn my attention to platform commissions. So these are the commissions by artists that are based in Ireland, selected by a panel that we convene. Platform commissions was initiated because not only for the strategic reasons that I was talking about previously, which were that, you know, we felt that we weren't able to, we didn't have the capacity, creative and curatorial capacity in our relationship traditionally with the guest curator. We also did it for another reason, which is that in an Irish context, there was relatively little opportunity for commissioning and commissioning over a relatively long period of time, you know, 2 years, 18 months and that sort of stuff. So platform commissions was an attempt to sort of address that. So there were 6 platform commissions in total, all of which were presented, in fact, not all of which, most of which were presented at the Gardens International venue. There was another work by Philip McCrilly that was an event that took place in partnership with a spa hotel. But most of the installation presentations took place here at Gardens International. And this work by Frank Sweeney was a film, a feature-length film, and this install that you can see, which includes the carpet and the chairs and the photographs on the wall, all exploring broadcast censorship during the troubles in Ireland in the 80s. And this is a work that's gone on to be presented in like the Rotterdam Film Festival, and you know, we're also discussing with the artist in a number of different institutions about the possibility of it being acquired into a national collection. So our ambition for platform commissions is very high, and we actually do, I mean, without wanting to contradict Christian's opening remarks, we don't see this as a sort of sideline actually to the main project. We actually see this with equal footing, and and that equal footing both is in terms of our own resources and the resources we bring to facilitating these projects, but also in terms of budget. We actually put quite a lot of money, we ring-fence quite a lot of our overall program budget behind these commissions. And thirdly, communicationally, we do our best to balance out our communication, so it's not just the guest program that's getting all the headlines. We do a deliberate push for platform commissions. So it's still a struggle. I will be open about that. It's still a struggle to find that kind of balance. And I do think that kind of art media, or the way that art tends to be consumed, it still sort of somehow needs a sort of figurehead at the front of it. So it's quite difficult. We found it kind of a little bit difficult, and I've had long, extended conversations with our publicist about how we communicate such a breadth of program sensibly when, you know, like art press and press releases just want like a name or a list of big shots or whatever. So this is a sort of an ongoing concern, really, how we kind of balance out the different channels of the program. Here's another example of a platform commission, this work by Lena Timoney. This was a work that was based on a kind of history of the dance hall in rural Ireland. And yeah, it was a kind of more formal play on the, I guess it's a work that you could describe as trying to make sculpture, make formal, make into the material world the kind of conditional effects of a rural regional nightclub. So there are elements of, you know, tiers, sunsets, semen. There's all these. There are all of these material, substances, emotional, an emotional traffic that runs kind of through these kinds of spaces. And Kleiner was interested in somehow turning that into sculpture, making that kind of manifest in sculptural form. And B. McMahon's project, again in the same venue. It was a large office complex that hadn't yet been fitted out, called Gardens International. B's project took over one floor, so it's a video, a kind of music video, a 25-minute long music video that was made locally in Limerick with a lot of actors, and in fact including people from the team. And that was presented together with a number of inflatable sculptures that would pulse, inflate, deflate at various moments within the rhythm of the video. Before I get onto this, I just want to sort of like recap then on the kind of shape of the program. So we had Sebastian's guest program that focused on gleaning. We had the platform commissions that in Frank and Kleiner's case, focused on ideas of citizenship or, in different ways. And then we had this work by B that was, I guess, quite playful. I mean, B's interest is in ideas of like group dynamics and how and nervousness, social nervousness and social apprehension, these kinds of things. So a lot of her works and her working processes involve like getting people in a room and giving them very few instructions and seeing what happens. And the works are often quite excruciating to watch and experience, because you have all these people that have been like half briefed trying to apprehend and understand what they're supposed to be doing. But somehow that stitches together as I think B's an incredible and complicated artist, and this was a very important project for us. But there were, I guess, in summary, there were quite a lot. The Biennial had lots of different like thematic textures. There was like this broad idea of citizenship, I suppose, but within that, you have Sebastian's focus on like agricultural, on the agricultural subject and agricultural processes. You also had, Frank and Kleiner looking at, ideas of the North and regionalism within an Irish context. And, I think there was quite a lot of concern from us as a team about how all that would hold together as a sort of broad proposition. But in the end, our fears were sort of like misplaced, because the program was large enough and capacious enough to actually allow people to take all sorts of different routes through it. Okay, I'm just going to speed up a little bit. I've only just got a couple more slides. Another project for us, a very important project, was this project called Never Look Back. And this was a project that was an attempt to speak about EVA's history and give testament to EVA's history and life within the city. I hadn't quite mentioned this, but maybe I've implied it, but that Limerick, it doesn't, in 40 years, it's now 45 years of EVA being in business, there are very few permanent sculptures that remain from various editions of EVA. The city does not exude this sense of it being home to Ireland's Biennial when the Biennial is not in fact on. And it's something that I think as an organization we've always kind of struggled with, and I guess in an effort to sort of connect ourselves as a project with the city beyond the Biennial and almost beyond the kind of conditional terms of contemporary art that come with the Biennial, we wanted a project that could maybe speak of other things and speak of the city as witness or the city as host to EVA over the years. So we came up with this project called Never Look Back, which exists as this very comprehensive website that charts all of the venues that EVA has used over 45 years, which I think amounts to something like 165. It's 165 spaces over 45 years. And we created a website where all of those spaces are indexed, and you can browse on them, and you get a bit of a summary both of the building and of the event that took place there. And what's interesting within a city like Limerick is that over that period of time and across that diversity of venues, many of those venues have changed hands multiple times. Many of those venues have, or some of those venues simply don't exist any longer. And by looking at the history of the Biennial through the spaces of the city, you also get to read in a very different way all the different economic, downturns and upswings that the city has gone through over the past 45 years. So it was a project that was less about art really, and more about the way that the city can play host to art and the I guess the terms of that kind of exchange. So in addition to the website and this indexable website, we created a series of posters and a series of plaques that appear across the city. And the posters just have an image of that, like a duotone image of the site, plus a one-liner kind of humorous summary of the work that took place there. So a toilet looking out over the Shannon in 1996 was actually Ilya Kabakov installation, but we don't describe it as an Ilya Kabakov installation. We describe it as a toilet looking out over the Shannon, and of course that's a way really of trying to sort of undo some of the I guess the artistic language and artistic signifiers, and reintroduce, another idea, which is the city as a kind of space of event. I hope that makes some sense. But this is a project that is also we're going to be running in future. The plaques remain in place. To coincide with the last edition, we also commissioned a number of different projects. One by Michelle Horrigan, which was a board game. Another by Kate Strain and Rachel Gilbourne, which was a hospitality event, all exploring the kind of history of EVA. And that's one that we're going to continue to operate in the coming years. Where am I? There's also last few slides. There's EVA Legacy is connected to the previous point. EVA Legacy is also super important, and we're looking more than ever now at ways in which we can continue the life of work that is produced in Limerick. So this is an example of an initiative where Olga Machinska's work that was presented in Ormston House in the 40th edition is going to be recited at a social enterprise and learning centre out in County Clare. And this is more and more of what we want to do. So the interventionism that I think is part of the spirit of EVA not only happens, in the production of the Biennial, but it's also like an outbound interventionism. So we kind of intervene art into other contexts, like beyond the rhythm of the Biennial. And just on an operational point, but an important one of the issues that and I'm sure is familiar to many that are in the business of managing biennials in different places, but one of the things that we really struggle with is actually around like retention of staff. Because we're on a biennial cycle, we're only employing a group of people once every 2 years. We can't expect people to stick around and wait on our call. So there's the real retention issue in a small town like Limerick for arts jobs and kind of creative technical work. So to some way alleviate that, we've come up with this initiative called the Production Leadership Program through a separate channel of funding that gives sort of ongoing training and paid work placement to creative producers to be part of the EVA team during the development stages of the Biennial, and also a kind of smaller scale but important training program for recent graduates just to skill up for install. So most of the 40th EVA International was actually installed using recently trained graduates that were trained by EVA through a process of workshops and hands-on training, and then employed to deliver the Biennial. So it's remarkable that we actually delivered a biennial with a group of people, most of which had never installed in a public institution before. And of course, they are people that now have the skills and the experience to go on and get employment elsewhere. So we see this as like an ongoing project that we're going to have to do. And of course, it's important for us, not only in terms of delivery, but it means that we're like genuinely and uncynically like creating jobs and creating opportunities and creating technical skills that people can use. This is my last slide, which is just some stats on EVA and the 40th edition. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to give you just a few key headlines. I already mentioned the 50 or so artists and the 17 venues. We had an audience. I mean, audience is very difficult to calculate, of course. I'm sure I'm not the only one within the Biennial network to discuss this, but it's very difficult to calculate across different venues. So we had a total clicker count of 95,000, which of course is a huge number in a city of the same size population. But of course, a lot of that includes like repeat visitors and people that are seeing more than one venue, of being clicked multiple times. So we actually estimate that the actual like unique audience visitors is about 15,000, which is I still think is a very proud figure. You'll see a lot of attendees from outside Limerick. That translates in terms of hospitality nights and that sort of stuff, and that kind of data is very important in terms of our advocacy locally and nationally. A lot of schools engagement. We work a lot with the local schools, and of course they use us as a way of for days out and for scoring points against various parts of their curriculum. And media and communications, EVA did very, very well. I mean, in large thanks to a great publicist, Sam Talbot, PR based in London, but EVA did remarkably well in terms of press, and we were covered, I mean, from eFlux Criticism to Freeze to Art Forum to Art Review to Art Monthly to Third Text to The Guardian. We got a lot of coverage, which is not always easy to achieve in a regional Irish context that has very little national cultural media. So we were very, very pleased with that. So I think that's me done. Thank you for bearing with me, and I hope that made some sense and was useful perhaps, but thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, thank you for the presentation, which I think was quite, or allowed us to get a pretty good sense of the work that you've done, not just with this last edition, but really in trying to reshape what EVA is within the context of Limerick, and maybe kind of really it feels quite interestingly about what the biennial model is, and what it can offer. Before I jump into some of the questions that I had written down while listening to you, I just wanted to give a quick check in the audience if someone wanted to immediately react to something that you said, or ask any specific question. And I leave that just there. Feel free to intervene and to interrupt me as well. I'm gonna go ahead and ask you my first question, which starts with an apology, which is I actually knew how you felt about the platform commissions and the fact that it was not a side project, but an integral part of EVA's programs. Maybe that's both an act of self-criticism, but also a learning moment in a sense that I think although we push for this idea of trying to keep the model alive and trying to understand how the model is changing and so on, that was a moment in which I also realized how much that idea of the single monolithic exhibition is still very much ingrained in what we understand as a biennial. So that's a note to myself. What I did want to ask you though about the platform commission project is something that you mentioned quite quickly at the very beginning, but I do feel that it's quite central, and probably one of the things that moved you towards it, which is this idea that you mentioned on the possibility it offers to break the 2-year cycle, no, and to allow projects to develop on a longer term, for artists. Maybe that's something that I can ask you to give us a sense about how much this actually is, or how much this format allows for this to happen, and what the response was also for artists to have the possibility of developing longer projects like that.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I'll try and talk about that in a roundabout way. Like, we emerged from COVID in 2021, having delivered what was supposed to be one edition that would take place within 3 months. We ended up delivering that as 3 kind of mini editions that took place in the end of 2020 and spring 21 and autumn 2021. And we did a kind of review process after that. And of course, COVID was quite a specific moment, for everyone. But the review process it kind of acknowledged that there was actually quite a lot of positives. And one of the positives was that it felt that it was much more matched to our resources, and the internal like dynamics of the team were much healthier actually in working like that. We were working not on a big scale, big team, but on a team of maybe, I don't know, 12 people, really, that were trying to deliver each segment of that program. And that actually felt like a really, really good. And we were also obviously in each phase working with fewer artists as well. And that relationship, or that balance between the number of artists and our resources as a team, felt really good. And we also felt that another positive was that we were taking a little bit of the pressure off the kind of boom and bust cycle of the exhausting boom and bust cycle of like biennial culture. However, the negatives were that we felt that it 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 maybe lost a little bit of, yeah, the points of momentum were quite difficult to find, and there was perhaps less take up, less audience engagement for certain events that we wanted to prioritize. So it was like EVA was constantly going on in the background, so therefore people just didn't really know how to engage with it, or how to distinguish like a the significance of one event versus a kind of general ambient sense of it happening. But we did come away from the COVID experience thinking that that might actually be the model that we would work with. That in fact we would think of it more like this: that we would basically start to work with curators and work with artists, and not really set kind of endpoints, really, but just almost see it as a series of processes at which at some point we would kind of intervene and create a public moment out of those, or maybe more than one public moment. So even if that commission or that research was not finished, it would still somehow, we would, our job would be to try and format that publicly and make that visible to people. And I think in the end, it just became too complicated, and we struggled to kind of articulate that idea both to ourselves and also to our kind of stakeholders. So we've sort of returned now to, I guess, a little more of a traditional model of seeing once every 2 years, this sort of pinnacle moment where the program all comes together. However, I talked about the Never Look Back project. That's something that is constantly burning away in the background. There's another project that I didn't even talk about called Better Words, which is a project that's to do with, it's like an educational project that looks at relationship between language and access. That's also something that happens on a year-round process. And so I think Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly answering your question, but I think we've probably given up on the idea of completely reformatting the rhythm of our program. But I think, in favor of a more traditional model. However, I think quite organically, we've started working in such a way that there are always things that occupy us and are part of our program, like through all the months of the calendar. Does that get anywhere close to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's also interesting to hear the difficulties that you encountered. I think it's quite interesting to hear that, and to understand the complexity between of breaking up, let's say, that traditional sense of the model of a biennial. Maybe before I move on to Lily's question, Lily Merler from Liverpool Biennial, who wrote in the chat, I just wanted to follow up on this, just to clarify, because you mentioned that you had both, like, it was complicated for the audience because it was not the usual way that you're presenting yourself in public. But it was also complicated for your stakeholders and so on. And maybe given the audience and given the context of the talk, I want to focus on that a bit more and understand a bit more what you mean by that. In a sense, when I hear that, I'm thinking that, of course, it has implication, for example, for funding and how this is perceived and so on. And so I'm guessing that the limitation there is also linked with what the funders understand as what the biennial is, and what the funders are used to, let's say, in terms of outputs, or what was the issue?
Yeah, funders, and yeah, and of course, I mean, so much funding is also sort of intersected with communication or publicity or visibility, and certainly for those things become codependent. Certainly for like international funders, which is a good portion of us of our revenue. They're interested in, like maximizing visibility for their artists, and they're interested in precisely the old rhetoric of international art professional audience and opening week, the traditional formats that we've come to expect from biennials. So I think some of the pressure is from there. I mean, within an Irish arts funding context, it's slightly different in that, the Irish Arts Council, they are concerned to a certain extent about that stuff, but they also are an arts development project, and they do see EVA really as an arts development project. So it's ultimately not about visibility so much as it's about what is this doing for art, and how does this benefit artistic practices and curatorial practices in this country. So I think, maybe they're a little bit more persuadable. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know.
The rest is more like the systemic elements of the artwork,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the artwork and its expectations.
Yeah.
I want to read you Lily's question, unless Lily wants to pose it herself, but not seeing a reaction. Oh,
It's fine. You can do it. Thank you.
thank you, Lily. And happy to have you with us from the other side of the Irish Sea. So Lily says, thanks, that was brilliant. I missed EVA last year, and so great to get an insight into the different approaches and projects. And her question then goes as follows: did the citizenship inquiry come before Sebastian's appointment, or did it develop from a conversation with him? And if the former, how did you go about finding a curator whose practice fitted within your idea?
Yeah, so the steps in that were that we came up with this broad, porous theme, or I mean, it's not really a theme, it's more like a keyword, I suppose, citizenship, and then that was the basis by which we both issued the call for the platform commissions and also invited a short list of curators to respond to that term. I mean, like I said, it was always intentional that theme of citizenship would kind of dissolve in the way that I think the best themes do. They dissolve like actually within different practices and presentations as they become manifest. And I think that was largely kind of what happened. I don't think the experience for much of the audience for the 40th International was, being confronted by this theme, in as much as I think that theme was just like embedded in very various ways within each project. So it was definitely the former. We set that theme first and we asked the curator to respond to it. And we also wanted to do that partly for the strategic reasons that I was talking about before. So, in the olden days, we would really ask for very little of a proposal. It was more like we would just pick someone who's, on the basis of their CV and then just try and persuade them to curate an EVA edition. And it felt that, I think as an organization, you become very kind of vulnerable, I guess, to what gets returned or like how that unfolds. Whereas at least in a process by which we set, a relatively open, flexible keyword, and we look for a response, it meant that we had some grounds for negotiating the shape of the project on a thematic basis, but still, allowed that curator to, effectively do what they want, or show the kinds of artists that they were keen on showing. I mean, Sebastian had a background in working at this kind of intersection between like activism and exhibition practice. So he was so I guess he entered the shortlist precisely because we were thinking about citizenship, and yeah. So I guess it did provide the rationale for the shortlist for sure. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
So thank you, Lily, for posing the question. I'll go ahead and run through the quite long list of questions that I had during the presentation. I'll try to limit it to maybe one more of mine, and if there is any other question coming from the audience, because I'm looking at the clock and we're already a bit over time, but I think the presentation and I think Eva's case is quite stimulating, so I really want to know a bit more about certain aspects. And maybe the last that I can pick is related to, again, something that you did mention during the presentation, and I think then, well, you went back and talked even more about while you were talking about the Never Look Back project, which is Sebastian's choice to include works from previous EVA presentation and EVA shows, which I have to say, knowing by now a little bit about Biennials, it's not something that happens often. Usually works are either they're permanent works, of course, in which case they stay, or they leave permanent traces somehow. But it's very rare to re-exhibit works that have been previously exhibited, especially within the same biennial. And that brings about a number of questions. I strongly assume that you're not a collecting exhibition institution, so I'm also wondering how you went about in tracing where these works were and so on. Which brings me to the overall question about archiving and how you keep the memory of EVA of past editions. And partially you answered that brilliantly with a project which I really look forward to diving into, which is the Never Look Back. But archives, of course, are not just the spaces, it's more than that. So if you can give us a sense of all of that, that would be, from my perspective, a wonderful way of closing this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there to respond to. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that, because in fact, it's not the first time actually EVA has represented a work. There was a work by Luc Deleur, which was presented initially in 1996, I think, and was presented again in 2012 um, for Annie Fletcher's edition. So it's not for the first time that we've done this. I mean, the practicalities of that were relatively simple. In a small Irish context, that was work that's we were very easy to it was very easy to find through and was part of the collection of the Irish Museum of Modern Art. I mean, I think to sort of respond to it, but not directly to your question, I will say that I'm not quite sure if I can be critical, like to what extent that worked as a um, I think to do something like that relies, of course, on, from an audience perspective, relies on a kind of like a collective memory, and I'm just not sure that EVA has the kind of intensities of audience. I mean, not over what was a 20-year gap that that produces anything particularly useful in seeing that work again in a slightly different context. I should also say it was not work that was, I think, originally commissioned by EVA. It was work that was borrowed at that time from the artist's studio, and and the second time round borrowed from a collection. It might have been different, for instance, if it was a work that had involved communities within the city or had a different depth of engagement. I do think it's interesting, and I mean, one of the things that I talked about the Never Look Back project. I also talked about some of the other kind of legacy projects, like Naveen's work at the Grove being a semi-permanent installation. I think we're gonna do a little bit more like we see Liverpool do, in fact, where um, permanent. I mean, they do on a much bigger scale, of course, but a lot of the permanent works within the city, like they still are part of the program. They're the part of the program. They feature in the guide. They of each subsequent edition, and I think that's something that we're going to start doing more of. I think that the 41st edition will include Naveen's work in the Grove, or Olga's work out in County Clare, and any other bits and bobs that we have still lying around the city. I think I like that idea of continuity and combination. The Never Look Back project, I guess we could see as like one part of like a bigger effort to consolidate our archive, and it needs to be seen within an Irish context and an Irish funding context, where there is a little bit of amnesia around its own history. Ireland is a country that has been historically quite poor and underdeveloped in terms of public services and cultural services for a long time, and then it had these quick sprints of acceleration where like institutions were built and projects were funded and that sort of stuff. As a result, there are kind of quite a lot of gaps within the cultural infrastructure, and one of the key gaps is around archiving. And that's a gap not only of physical infrastructure and facility, but it's also a gap in terms of funding mindset. The Arts Council don't really fund anything like that. They don't fund archives. They don't fund anything that's like backward looking or inward looking within an organization. They're kind of interested in artistic development and like audience engagement. That is really what they are focused on. So we were aware of that when we came up with a Never Look Back project. So what we have to do is somehow make a program out of our archive, right? You have to turn it into a program and give it a kind of presentness, which I think is super interesting, but it also sort of, I think it's worth acknowledging the kind of where that came from and the kind of limits of that. And yeah, like recording EVA's history through the spaces of the city is like one way of doing it, but we do see it as part of like a bigger effort to sort of carry testimony of the archive in different ways. It's only since 2020 have we got ourselves like a permanent office, and that office includes a dedicated space with a small and still forming archive, which can be used by by researchers and by ourselves and that sort of stuff. And it's a small step towards making that archive much more public, which is something we would ultimately like to do. Because within the archive, you not only, it's not only significant for the inner workings of the organization, but given the history of EVA, you have a history of not only of contemporary art in Ireland, you have a history of international exchange within the visual arts in Ireland, or within the capsule of that archive. So we don't undervalue it. We think it's really, really important, but we have to be kind of strategic and precise about how we find the resources to work with it.
Yeah, it's good to hear that you're developing the physical archive as well, because I actually have taken a look before at the online archive, but especially for researcher and more in-depth inquiries, let's say, it's important to have the physical side as well. So that's great to hear. I'm gonna jump back to the chat, and I'll read out Sarah's message. Hi, Sarah here from the Gothenburg Biennial. Congratulations, Matt, and the entire team for a fantastic edition of EVA, and thank you for an excellent presentation. Your presentation touched on so many things that we are dealing. Sorry, skipping. We're dealing, struggling, and thinking about right now in terms of organizational and strategical aspects of our project. I guess we find ourselves where EVA was in 2018. Could you say something about the strategic document and how, if that has been helpful, and will you be crafting a new one every 5 years?
Yeah, it's been super helpful, and without it, I think it would be very difficult to have made the changes that we were able to make. I mean, the strategic document allowed us to like bring along or take both the board and stakeholders, funders on a kind of journey, and it forces you to try and simplify what you're trying to what you're doing as an organization without the kind of forest of like artistic and cultural signifiers. So it was, yeah, it was a really useful exercise. It came about through like a period of reflection. I mean, I kind of led on it. I have to kind of own that, I guess. I led on it and I effectively wrote it, but it was sort of, we also worked with a consultant at various stages, and we pulled together a number of different groups of people, and we road tested some of the ideas that were in it with those people. So it probably took about 6 months to sort of pull together. And yes, we are actually currently working on a new one at the moment. It's not going to be quite as dramatic in terms of a change, but it's really just about maybe even going through, or it's just about refinement more than anything else, and maybe doing a little bit more work on ourselves as an organization. I think, in a nutshell, EVA as an organization that I found myself in when I first was appointed in 2017, had done this amazing work, but it was very much an event. The whole culture of the organization was very much an event. It had a kind of hot desking mentality. Everyone was kind of freelance and sort of loosely tacked on to the delivery of it. And we're trying to shift it into more like an organization. And with that, a certain amount of organizational stability, longer term commitments, and a developmental arc that, is not just about working with good curators and good artists, but actually being an important part of the kind of infrastructural puzzle, like within Irish, within Irish cultural infrastructure. So Yeah, that stuff is, I mean, sounds kind of super boring. And I mean, if I heard myself 10 years ago saying all of this stuff, I would have choked on my soup. But it's actually become like more important to me now than anything else is are these kinds of questions. It's like, how do you improve the infrastructure? And I think a biannual and the biannual format is a really interesting way of road testing those kinds of ideas, because you can do things that bricks and mortar institutions cannot. And yeah, and I've kind of experienced that sort of firsthand. So the new strategy is currently in being shaped up, and I mean, one of the sort of takeaways there is that we're going to we'll do more work to think of ourselves as an organization, and that means looking at things like staff retention, building the staff out, making longer term engagement relationships with schools and like third level educational providers, all that kind of stuff. And it's it's very helpful. I mean, I think one of the things, I mean, maybe I should have started on this point, but one of the things that sort of really got me into the momentum of thinking like this was a sort of frustration that, like, the history of biennials, which is a history that I'm very interested in, is really like a history of curators. It's a history of curating, and I think not enough is said of the conditions of invitation that bring curators into these situations in the first place. There's a huge gaps actually in art history in general, in exhibitions history, and within biennial history, about the kind of institutional forces that invite curating into being. And I guess I want to think about that, and I want to sort of scrutinize it. And I think it just feels healthier to be doing that, rather than sort of expecting all the solutions and all the answers to come through the kind of this very thin, precise channel of like curatorial of curating and curatorial proposals. It's a bit of a woolly response there, but I hope it's some way helpful.
No, I thought it was actually quite enlightened, let's say, even though it's a term I don't really love, but
Even better.
but I think it really brings back this sense, which is what brought me personally also close to Biennials in the first place, which is the fact that I've always had a sense that they've always been a more experimental institution within the art system than the brick and mortar institutions that we have. And I completely agree with your reading that the reading of Biennials has often stopped at their more events element, rather than going into their institutional side, let's say.
Yeah.
So there are a few researchers and researchers out there that break that, but it's far and few in between. So no, I think it was a good reminder that we should keep the model in its experimental form and challenge it, and but also realize, as you also mentioned, do it in a self-critical way and in a critical way, and understand what actually works and what doesn't, and what is the response from the audience, from funders, from our partner institutions. I have at least another 5 or 6 questions that I wrote down during the presentation, but given that we're already almost half an hour longer than we should have been, I think, unless there are other questions from the audience, and I take the moment to thank Sarah again for her question. Unless there are other questions from the audience, I would like to thank you for participating and for presenting the 40th edition of EVA International, but also giving us such a good moment to really reflect on the Biennial model overall. So yeah, thank you, Matt, for being here, and take it as an extension also, of course, to the whole team of EVA for their efforts in putting together this edition. And I of course want to remind everyone to keep a track of our communication, both through our social media and websites, for future IBA events. And because this is the first IBA stage and our first event overall of the year, I also want to remind everyone to keep a special eye out for future communication about our upcoming 11th General Assembly, which will be happening in collaboration with the Lyon Biennale. So yeah, again, thanks, Matt, and thanks everybody for joining us today.